Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Wisconsin Women in Conservation Summer Camp webinar on snakes and turtles. We're so excited that you could join us today. My name is Naomi Serrano. I'm the Assistant Policy Director at Michael Fields Agricultural Institute and the Southeast Regional Coordinator for WEWIC. We have other WEWIC team members that are on the call with us today as well. Can you all wave hello? Thanks, y'all. Please feel free to eat your lunch during the webinar today. We have two great speakers who will be sharing lots of great information on turtles and snakes. But all right, let's go ahead and get started with our overview of WEWIC. Esther Shakina is a research agronomist at Michael Fields and also the program director for this project. Esther, please take it away.
Thank you, Naomi. Good morning, everybody. I'm very excited and happy to welcome you all for another of this WEWIC webinar from the summer series of 2023. Today's much awaited presentation would be on critters of conservation, turtles and snakes. It is a matter of great honor for us as a team that today's presenter, Dr. Rebecca Christoffel, is one of a WEWIC team member and an authority on the unhuggables, as she would call it. I'd also take this opportunity to thank Bethany Storm for being here and bringing us her unique perspective as a citizen scientist in this area of work. Before we can get to the presentation itself, I'd like to introduce WEWIC to those of us here for the first time. The Wisconsin Women in Conservation project was led by the Michael Fields Agricultural Institute in partnership with 4 other organizations, namely Renewing the Countryside, Marble Seed, Wisconsin Farmers Union, and with our research being led by the E-Resources Group, of which Rebecca is a big part of. This project is funded by the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is also called NRCS, which will be, like if you are a part of WEWIC, you'll be hearing NRCS time and again. Most of you know our boots on the ground staff, our coordinators who work with each of you to make your dreams for your land a reality. We have a new addition to the team and are pleased to introduce Heather Caton as the coordinator from the Wisconsin Farmers Union working with you all. So Heather is the newest member. She's the owner-operator of Zandria Artisan Farms. She has 10+ years of experience with K-12 education, and she's a farmer advocate for conservation through TNC. She's a lead farmer in the producer-led watershed group, Farmers of the Washoe Creek. Thank you, Heather, and we welcome you to the team. So as you're all aware, WEWIC works with women landowners who farm, who are non-operators, and we also work with other farmers and beginning farmers for women. We meet and provide a safe space to share stories and connect to one another. We meet with other women who are passionate about conservation and help finding a network of peers and professionals to thrive with. We learn together about building a healthy soil and have support and technical help for the conservation plans that you want for your land. And we try and help to collaboratively steward our land for our future generations. So in this context, we also help build a local community of women where you can lean on one another, support, get motivated, and grow as well. So WEWIC was a project that was initiated in October of 2020. We're almost nearing 3 years of completion. And we've been working in 6 tri-county clusters in Wisconsin that we work about 18 counties in Wisconsin. And so far, almost 2,500 women are actively engaged in events, newsletters. We've completed 56 conservation plans. That means like 56 women have conservation plans on their hand for their land, thinking about it, getting some resource help for their land, also signing up for cost share. And through WEWIC, they've been getting the help that they need. And there are many more in the process of being written, thanks to our coordinators for all the tough work they do on the ground. We have conducted 20 Zoom events, 34 learning circles. If you are part of WEWIC, you would know how our learning circles are, where we share, and then you can find people who are like you, who know more, and to connect with them. We also have 13 field days. This is the season of field days. We have one coming up in Southwest tomorrow. and we've done 13 educator events. We have a big number of in-person evaluations to help our research in order to draw and interpret meaningful conclusions. And successful First Ever Wisconsin Educators Conference was just completed in April, where we had 100 participants. So the events in 2023, we are done with our spring learning circles in the various tri-counties. We are doing our field days and then the summer webinars. This is the second one. As I mentioned, tomorrow is our field day in Southwest. Anybody in that region, please feel free to come, to register, obviously. And then we have our educator happy hours coming up in July and fall learning circles. There are 6 more. And then the other events that we marked up for this year is Look Book Launch. There's a beautiful picture that's coming up where we are highlighting the women and the conservation work that they have done in Wisconsin and lifting them up and honoring all that they have done for stewarding this land. So please be a part of that in October. We also provide mentor support through conservation coaches, professional and program resources, get a technical help for writing conservation plans, and also the educator network. We bring educators networking with each other in order to bring more resources to the ground through Zoom events as well. Okay, it is just a short overview. We welcome you all to be a part of our events that's going on. If you go on to our website, www.wewic.org, you can see the list of events that's going to go across the state for the next 2 months. Please feel free to register, come meet our coordinators. We are part of this great movement of women in Wisconsin. If you also want to be a part of the listserv, where you can exchange ideas and have questions answered, please let us know of your interest and sign up for our listserv. And so with this, I thank you all for coming in today, and I will just pass the stage on to our presenters for today. Thank you so much.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Esther. The information, some of the things that you talked about, our WeWic team members have also dropped links for or information for in the chat. So please check that out in the chat as well. But we're now going to get started with our first content expert, Rebecca Christoffel. Rebecca is the co-director of Turtles for Tomorrow, a small local charity dedicated to the conservation and management of Wisconsin's rare amphibians and reptiles, particularly turtles. She is also the co-author of 3 field guide to the herpetofauna of Wisconsin. Sorry for butchering that. And she wrote or co-wrote 3 accounts in the newly published Amphibians and Reptiles of Wisconsin, including the ornate box turtle, common musk turtle, and ring-necked snakes. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for being with us today. We're so excited to hear from you.
So part of the reason to have the poll was just to find out from folks and to remind people that you probably are doing things already that will help to benefit snakes and turtles, and you may not even realize it. So I wanted to make sure that we got that question asked so that we could talk about some of these things. And, simple things like just not using chemicals on your property. There are lots of turtles and snakes that eat insects. And so if you're poisoning the insects on your property, when the turtles or snakes eat the insects, they too get poisoned. So it's that food chain thing. Anyway, you may be wondering, why does she have a white-tailed fawn on this slide? I thought this was going to be about turtles and snakes. And this is a reminder for me to talk to you just briefly about a couple of things when it comes to turtles and snakes. And one thing is that these animals are not nearly as well known to us as things like white-tailed deer and turkey and pheasant. So as a wildlife biologist, I know that traditionally we manage for game species. And what funds wildlife management in the state of Wisconsin? Primarily hunters, through hunting licenses and through their purchases, the taxes that they pay voluntarily on things like firearms, etc. So it should be no surprise that they get a lot of the attention when it comes to wildlife management. Okay, but let's get on with turtles and snakes now. These animals, you may ask yourself, well, why should I manage my land with reptiles in mind? I mean, what good are they? Who cares about them? Well, I like to think of them as locavores. And those of you who are really interested in the local foods movement and that, this is your local wildlife movement. These animals are here in Wisconsin 12 months of the year. Unlike some of our fine feathered friends, oh, I'm not sure why things are moving on me. Unlike some of our fine feathered friends that go off to Costa Rica for 6 months of the year and then come back, right? These guys are here all of the time. And so that makes them very precious to me. Another thing about these animals is that they're ancient. Turtles have existed in their current form for 100 million years. All right, they saw the rise and fall of the dinosaurs. I do not want us to lose them on my watch. We've got about 350 turtle species worldwide. Of those, 60% are either threatened or have already become extinct in the wild. Okay. There are 10 times as many snake species in the world, about 3,500. And of those, 20% are vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered. But of that 3,500 species, 60% have never been assessed in terms of their conservation status. What does that mean? It means we don't know enough about them to say whether they're increasing, decreasing, or staying the same. We just don't know enough about them. Turtles and snakes are very important on the lands in the habitats in which they live. They are primarily predators, that is carnivores. They're going to eat other animals. Some turtles will also eat some fruits. Our ornate box turtle happens to like prickly pear cactus, but primarily they're eating other animals. Snakes are strictly carnivores. So they're eating things like insects, and they're eating soil invertebrates, and they're eating fish, and they're eating birds, and they're eating mammals, and they're even eating other snakes. Okay, so they're really important in terms of their role as predators, but they also provide food for other animals. If you've ever been fortunate enough to see newly hatched out little turtles, they're about the size of a quarter, things like painted turtles. They make a tasty morsel for lots of things, for crows, for ravens, for opossum, for skunk, you name it. Everybody wants to eat them. They scurry to get to the water, and then they get to the water and fish want to eat them. So if you are a young turtle, your odds of making it to adulthood are very low. When it comes to snakes, we have snakes that are as small as an adult, at about 10 inches in length, to those that can get to be over 6 feet in length. So there's lots of different animals that will eat our snakes, including birds of prey, including things like wading birds, great blue herons, cranes, that sort of thing. Lots of animals like to feed on snakes. So when it comes to you and habitat management, you need to understand that turtles and snakes aren't like birds or mammals. They're very different in terms of their physiology, their anatomy, their needs, but they do have some things in common with birds and mammals. But here are some differences. The first difference is that turtles and snakes are what we call ectotherms. If you are as old as I am, when you were in science class, they said they were cold-blooded. I hate to use that term. It makes them sound like they're serial killers or something. That's just not fair. But birds and mammals, like us, are what we call endotherms. We've got little furnaces going 24/7 every day, keeping our body temperature very stable. When it comes to turtles and snakes, when they first emerge in the spring and it's cold, they're very slow or immobile. And when it gets very warm, when they're overheated, they end up seeking shelter in cool areas, such as under rotting logs or underground. Turtles and snakes don't provide parental care to their youngsters, little or no parental care. There are a few exceptions to this rule, but mostly they hatch out of the egg, they're on their own. Mother lays her eggs, and she's never going to see those youngsters again. As juveniles, they look just like the adults, only in miniature, but there are some differences with juveniles. They'll use different habitats. Why? because juveniles have a very high surface area to mass ratio. That means they absorb heat and they can quickly overheat. It also means they can desiccate or dry out very readily. So the youngsters have to spend more time in shady areas under cover than do the adults. Both turtles and snakes keep growing throughout their lives. They don't stop. Unlike you and I, we'll stop growing when we're about 18 years old, but turtles and snakes, they keep going. In fact, turtles are some of our longest living land animals, with some tortoises readily reaching more than 100 years old. And these animals have limited mobility. Remember, I called them locavore? What is a long range movement for a turtle or snake in Wisconsin? 1 mile. That's a really long range movement for one of these animals. So they really are very, very local. The other thing with limited mobility is they're not very fast. We all think about turtles as not being fast, but we think about snakes as being fast. Well, our speed demon of the snake world in Wisconsin is what we call the North American racer, or the blue racer, and it reaches the amazing speed of 4 miles an hour. However, if you were a peregrine falcon and you were swooping down to feed on something, you'd be traveling at 70 miles an hour. So turtles and snakes are both slow in their movement and they don't move all that far. So what is it like to be a snake in Wisconsin for a year, or a turtle for a year? How exciting is it? Well, for about half the year, it's very unexciting. You're dormant. You're not doing anything except what we call hibernating. You're down underground, avoiding the frost line, and you've really, really lowered your respiration. You've really, really lowered your heart rate. It's very, very slow. In the spring, you'll emerge from hibernation. It's pretty cold out there in the spring, so you're going to be pretty slow. So you have to spend your time raising your body temperature by doing things like basking. You probably need to find some food because you've lost a good deal of body weight over the winter, and you have to find others of your kind. If you want to produce more of your kind, you're going to have to find a mate and breed. Then when the summer comes, you're feeding. If you're a female, you're laying eggs or you're giving birth to live young. Our garter snakes actually give birth to live young. And as a female, you'll have deposited about 30% of your body weight in those eggs. So you're going to really need to pack in the food after that birthing event if you even hope to be able to survive the next winter and get to breed again the following year. In the fall, these animals start to make their way back to where they're going to spend the winter. And remember, these places where they spend the winter, they have to avoid the frost line. So they're limited on the landscape. And so some of these animals may have to travel some distance, 1+ miles, to actually get to the place where they'll overwinter. So I hope that gave you a little introduction to these animals generally. Now let's move into what can you do to help our local turtle and snake populations. And the focus of this webinar for me is habitat management. And I should mention that some public lands are ready. Wisconsin DNR owns some properties that are specifically managed for rare turtles and rare snakes. But there are other lands like U.S. forest lands. There are some land trust lands. And then there are some other nonprofit entities that hold land and specifically manage it for turtles and snakes or reptiles. But there's a lot that any of us can do to manage whatever land we own or steward in ways that won't harm but will benefit turtles and snakes. So what do these animals need? Well, they need places to lay their eggs. They need places to overwinter. They need places to bask so they can raise their body temperature when they need to. Females gestate. All that means is they're basically pregnant or gravid. They're getting ready to give birth, and they need to speed the development of the young inside them. They need cover if they don't want to be eaten by something, or if they need to cool down. They need food and controlling exotic invasive species in some cases, and controlling medium-sized mammalian predator populations. I'm thinking things like raccoons in some cases, because in some cases, those animals can completely negate any sort of recruitment to a turtle population. So what are some of the specifics? Well, some things that sometimes we don't even think about is leaving some cover, please. I work a lot with ornate box turtles. I have in the past, and with prairie dwelling snakes. And people think of, oh, open habitat. You don't want to have any brush there. Actually, you do, because some life stages, as I mentioned with the ornate box turtle, the youngsters, I tracked these little baby turtles for a summer. They're spending their time under cover, under sumac, under dewberry, which is a kind of raspberry, a rubus species. They want to be in the shade. They don't want to be out in the open. And again, you need cover to keep yourself safe from predators. You might consider structure. A lot of snakes will go up into the branches of low-growing trees, and they will use that for basking. They also use it as a place to shed their skin. So structure is very important to these animals, more so than the very specific types of plants that are living there. The other thing is that for turtles and snakes, a prey base, having other animals that they can eat, probably is more important than the very specific types of plants that you have growing in an area. If you are a person who is managing habitat, savanna, woodland, prairie, and you use burning as a tool, when it comes to turtles and snakes, your burning is best conducted during the winter when the turtles and snakes are inactive, they're not on the surface of the ground. If you have to do your burns during their active season after April 1st, it's safest to do so when it's overcast and cool, that is under 50 degrees Fahrenheit for a few days. They're much less likely to be active then. And if you're going to do spring burns, please, if you know you have a snake hibernaculum on your property, avoid that area. The snakes may be up and about just right around their hibernaculum, and they're very vulnerable. Again, they're pretty cool when they're first emerging from hibernation. Brush piles can be useful as wildlife habitat. However, you want to make sure if you're making brush piles that either you make them and you burn them right away, or if you're going to have them out there for some time, that you disassemble the brush pile before you burn, because otherwise you're going to find wildlife that's gone into that brush pile as a refugia, as a place to stay safe, and then you run fire through it and you just negated all of your efforts. So brush piles are something that are good, but you need to know what to do so you don't end up harming populations. Controlling invasive exotic species, that's something that you need to do if you want to have habitat, which is good habitat. Spotted knapweed, which is pictured here, can get to be very invasive, and it's often found in sandy areas where ornate box turtles live, and that makes it a very inhospitable place for the ornate box turtles. So luckily for us, we live in Wisconsin where there are lots of resources, lots of resource people who can help us with dealing with these sorts of invasive exotics. If you use mowing to manage your property, you're going to want to keep the mower bar high. And what I mean by that is 8 inches or higher. That will certainly save a lot of snakes from being chopped up or turtles being having the blade hit them on the shell and potentially injuring or killing them. The other thing is you want to avoid suction. Some mowers, you've got this suction going on, and that will just suck the snakes right in and again, get them killed. So if you have to mow during the active season, just like we say with birds, if you can wait until after July 15th, that is ideal. That's after the nesting season. And then please do not feed or encourage mammalian predators. And again, we're mostly talking raccoons here, foxes, skunks, opossum, these animals, coyotes, badgers, all like to feed on turtle eggs and that. And their populations in many cases have really exploded. So you can discourage them by not providing refuges, not providing food sources like garbage that they can readily get into and will help their populations. And in some very special cases, you may need to exercise some lethal control. There are some more basic things that we can do, like we had listed in the poll. One simple thing, but that is incredibly important, is keeping pets indoors. It's estimated that 650 million reptiles and amphibians are taken by outdoor cats in the USA each year. That's a tremendous number of reptiles and amphibians. And it's safest for you, safest for your pet, safest for wildlife for your pet to be indoors. Even if the number that I quoted, that estimate, were 10 times off, that would still be 65 million reptiles and amphibians being killed annually by outdoor cats in the USA. You can participate in the Wisconsin Turtle Conservation Program. That they have 3 goals to this program. One is to expand our knowledge of turtle ranges in Wisconsin. 2 is to increase education and awareness about turtles in Wisconsin. And lastly, they're trying to locate dangerous road crossings for future construction of turtle crossing structures. And I just want to mention that turtle crossing signs seem like such a wonderful thing. But you all live in Wisconsin and you know about deer crossing signs. And I want to know how many people slow down when they see a deer crossing sign. This will give you an idea of how many people slow down when they see a turtle crossing sign. So the real power is getting structures in place so that the turtles can't get up on the road and can't get themselves killed. Or if you're in a very local neighborhood where everybody's on board, turtle crossing signs may facilitate or may help during turtle nesting season. You can also donate to specific funds that are set up for reptile and amphibian conservation. The Natural Resources Foundation of Wisconsin has such a fund now. They've had it for a few years now, and that helps with us getting to know more about these animals and managing and conserving them. And lastly, please keep turtles and snakes in the wild. I know it only seems like, but I'm just taking one. But if all 3 million of us in Wisconsin, or whatever our population estimate is, just takes one, that's a heck of a lot of turtles and snakes being taken out of the wild. And with that, I'd like to toss it back to Noemi. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much. I learned so much. I hope you all did as well. Up next, we have Bethany Storm, our citizen scientist for today's webinar. Bethany started her early career focusing on wildlife, drawing her into ecosystem restoration and the understanding that without the habitat, there would be no wildlife. Bethany values the importance of creating habitat for wildlife while growing perennial and annual crops on her family's 5-acre homestead. She started raising animals to feed her family, and her love and respect for those animals' lives, and alongside a desire to use a whole animal and preserve their beauty, led her to tanning hides in a clean, natural way and founding Driftless Tannery. Thank you so much for joining us today, Bethany. We're excited to hear from you. Go ahead and get started.
Great. Thanks for having me. Thank you for allowing me to be here to talk about my favorite group of animals. I wrote out my thoughts as I pondered what to say because much like these critters that I love, I'm shy and prefer to stay hidden. I did create a slideshow of some of the turtles who have touched my life over the past few decades. You'll see turtles I've cared for, studied, or visited on vacation. There's also an older aerial photo of my homestead with some written details about what's there now. Hopefully you'll enjoy looking at the slides while I unprofessionally read from my notes. So my dad bought me a box turtle my freshman year of high school. I had just moved to a new town and I needed a friend. Sebastian was more than a companion. He became one of my greatest teachers. He was an ornate box turtle. What I didn't realize at the time, but it's clear to me now, is that Sebastian could have lived right in the wild right here in Wisconsin before being boxed up and sent to my local pet store. Within a week of having him, it became apparent that he was very ill. He wasn't eating, his eyes were puffed up with mucus, he was not thriving. I took him to a vet who knew a little bit about reptiles, but not much. He knew that Sebastian was malnourished and dehydrated. So I went to our local library, checked out all the books I could find on turtles. I think there were 5 total. 2 were children's books. 1 was a rudimentary care guide and the others read more like textbooks. I gleaned from all that reading that Sebastian needed more than worms and fruit and a box to keep him from escaping my room. I spent the next 6 months force feeding Sebastian a concoction of various flavors of baby food, crushed vitamin tablets, and electrolytes. And he survived. And he went on to live with me for another 30 years. My experience with Sebastian lit a passion for animal care in me. I started a junior volunteer program with a local wildlife rehabilitation center, Willowbrook Wildlife Center in Glen Ellen, Illinois. Truly a top-notch facility. I learned the best methods of care and husbandry from them. In December of my junior year of high school, my mom got a call from a friend. Their son had picked up a baby painted turtle off the Riverwalk that summer and had brought it home to keep it as a pet. They enjoyed it for a time, but no longer wanted to care for it. They asked if I wanted it, and of course my answer was yes. I knew from all my research that releasing the turtle back into the frigid waters of the DuPage River after spending months inside wasn't going to work. So by spring, Frito was so used to being hand-fed and cared for, he didn't stand a chance in the wild. Frito still lives with me. I went on to study environmental biology at Eastern Illinois University. During that time, I continued to volunteer at the Wildlife Center on holidays, and I volunteered to help any grad student or professor do whatever study it was that they were doing. I helped one study aquatic turtle populations in local ponds. I assisted with research on the Sangamon River, studying fish and water quality and sewage outflow. I studied nesting grassland birds in fallow ag fields. And I got to work with a well-known herpetologist named Dr. Ed Mall. He had a live turtle collection that I helped oversee. Working in that herpetarium, I probably butchered that name, was my favorite volunteer activity on campus. He had a large collection of Asian species, and he had a snapping turtle that if you tapped it on the top of the head, it came up to the surface and opened its mouth, and I threw a handful of wet dog food. That was his dinner. During spring of 1995, Dr. Mall was contacted by Fish and Wildlife officer in Kentucky. Someone had caught 3,000 hatchling turtles. Someone was caught with 3,000 hatchling turtles with the intent to sell them. The guy went to court and the turtles all came to Dr. Mall's collection. The pet trade is still putting a real strain on our native populations. Over the past 5 years, 30 major smuggling events have been intercepted. Poachers target hatchlings and breeding-aged females and sell them on the black market in Asia and Europe. The hatchlings that came to Dr. Mall were put in 3 baby pools. They died by the hundreds every day. The university was not set up to care for them. I rescued one and brought it back to my dorm room. I nursed it back to health, and Espina still lives with me. Hindsight, I broke the law, and I should not have, but I was trying to make the best out of a bad situation, and I was young. I did a summer internship at the Wildlife Center that I had volunteered at, and after my courses were done, I took an internship at the Conservancy of Southwest Florida in their Wildlife Center. I got to work with exotic Florida wildlife there, everything from pelicans to a bobcat and a black bear. The Conservancy had many departments. I spent my free time volunteering with the science department on their sea turtle research or helping out with their education programs. I wanted to know everything and do everything while I was there. During my 6-month stint at the Wildlife Center, I released countless birds onto golf courses or turtles back into the neighborhoods that they came from. I started to see the connection between wildlife and their ever-shrinking habitat. It doesn't do much good to heal an animal only to turn it back out into the same truncated habitat that caused its injury in the first place. When my internship ended, I got a job working to restore those ecosystems with the state of Florida, with the Department of Environmental Protection and NOAA. And I eventually became the regional biologist for the State Department of Forestry. I attribute my early career success to the fact that I showed up. I volunteered to lend a hand whenever one was needed. I made a name for myself in the Southwest Florida natural resource community. I continued to work on as many research projects as I could. I studied all kinds of wildlife populations, fish, sharks, bats, gopher tortoises, sea turtles, small mammals, frogs, crocodiles, invasive iguanas, and birds. I volunteered before and after my day job. I immersed myself in the habitats of Southwest Florida for another 4 years. It's like living on the Discovery Channel. But as all good things do, it came to an end. I left that work to start a family back home in the Midwest. I did get a job working with the DuPage County Forest Preserve and continued to help out with any field work that I could. I worked with folks studying Blanding's turtles and forest ecology. I loved what I did, but I wanted to be a mom more. So I left the work and I raised my children. I continued to volunteer doing frog surveys, and I spent lots of time teaching neighbor kids about turtles and other wildlife. Sebastian, Frito, and Espina became ambassadors. I taught every parent I knew why turtles don't make good pets and how they live forever if you treat them right. I ended up with a few more turtles through the years, pets no one wanted. I loaned out my turtles to friends so their children could experience the wonder without taking another turtle from the wild. When my daughters were young, one morning during our daily walk, my neighbor Lily and I stumbled upon a disturbed snapping turtle nest. It looked like a mink had ravaged the nest in the night. Eggs were torn open, exposing hatchlings to the world just days before they were ready. Most had their egg sacs still attached to their bellies. The predator had eaten some of the egg sacs, but left most of the turtles alive, just prematurely exposed. Lily walked back to my house with me to get Tupperware. We gathered 34 hatchlings and brought them back to my house. I put each one in its own cup with a damp paper towel and put them in a warm, draft-free area. I cleaned the cups every day and the turtles got rinsed gently and fresh towels put in. By the end of the next week, all but one had survived. So I had 33 hatchlings left. Most of them had absorbed their egg sac and could now right themselves, because you can imagine, a big balloon on your belly, you can't really stand upright. Each day I had a gaggle of neighborhood kids at our house. The rehab story was big news. I had parents and kids stop by that I had never met. The turtles were local celebrities. And at this point, I knew what I was doing was against the law. I had contraband in my possession, but it got me a wide audience. And I told dozens of families that these creatures are not pets. They belong in the wild. And as soon as they fully hatched, I put them in a tank and fed them bloodworms. When all of them proved capable of feeding, I gathered a few select neighborhood kids, and we had a release party down by the pond where their nest was. I'm pretty sure the turtles are still part of those kids' childhood stories. A couple of years ago, I brought my turtles to the Argyle Library here in town to do a presentation and again emphasize to the crowd that they are amazing creatures that belong in the wild. The life I have given them is not the life I would like them to have. My love for Sebastian led me to a life of research, a life of studying wildlife and what they need to survive. Sebastian died a few years ago. Frito and Espina still live with me 30 years later. My family moved to Wisconsin 9 years ago to create a permaculture homestead. Some health issues in my family compelled us to live a less suburban life with fresh air and access to amazing food and views. We have a food forest, over an acre of prairie, a half acre of wet sedge meadow, 2 acres of pasture for our sheep and goats, and the chickens and turkeys forage in and around native plants on our property. I desperately want to see more snakes. I don't have them currently, and I can't wait to implement some of the suggestions that Rebecca has. My life took a turn when I moved to rural Wisconsin. I started raising animals for food and fiber, and death is an inevitable part of living with farm animals. And when that part came, it was important for me to use the whole animal. The only option I had for preserving their hides was to tan them myself or to send them to a chemical tannery. That led me and my fellow soil sister Danielle to establish Driftless Tannery, a natural alternative for farmers looking to preserve their hides of their animals. We tan hides and make legacy textiles in the natural way. Currently, 98% of leather and sheepskin that you can find in the stores are produced in a pretty toxic chemically way from countries that don't have eco standards. Anyway, you can find out more about Driftless Tannery on Instagram, Facebook, searching our website. I don't have a lot of free time between being a mom, caring for a homestead, and running a business, but I continue to volunteer. My daughters and I, along with 2 soil sisters, they're in that picture, Chris Marion and April Questia, have been monitoring Erickson Creek as a part of the state Water Action Volunteer Program. It's where we collect parameters in the field on the stream and share it with the website with the fisheries biologists. They take that information and use it to make planning decisions, to guide their management priorities. It's a small time commitment that brings my girls and I much joy. Getting into the creek with our friends each month during the summer is really balm for the soul. I hope you take away one thing about my personal story. Don't buy your child a turtle, no matter how lonely they are. Get them a cat or a dog and keep them inside. Those animals have evolved to bring us comfort. Reptiles are resilient if given the habitat they need to survive. If you remove them from that space that they've claimed, they will always try to return. No matter how far you take them, they will always want to be home. Seen it in their eyes. The other thing I want you to take away is volunteer whenever you can, however you can. Natural resource agencies and nonprofits can't afford to implement all their great ideas without volunteers. They rely on volunteers to fulfill their missions. A few hours a week or a month can make a big difference, and you will learn a ton along the way.
Thank you so much, Bethany. That was amazing. Such a beautiful story. I mean, you can just see it in the comments. People really appreciated that. So thank you so much for sharing so much of your story with us